you're never going to exit your business if you haven't actually empowered those who work for you to actually run the business, right? You will always be a cult of personality. It will always be built around the cult of your ego.
Welcome back to the TrustBuilt Podcast, where we talk to business owners about how business can be grinding and how to get out of it and how to build leadership so that the company can thrive without the owner being involved. Today's guest, I have Bryan Yates, and Bryan is also a coach. He is a personal performance coach. He does leadership. I don't want to steal his thunder, but welcome to the show, Bryan.
Thanks for having me on, Alan. It's great to be here.
So let's talk about, I want to get into this real quick.
Okay.
So both of us are coaches.
Sure.
Both of us coached athletes, or I still coach athletes. We still do some athletic coaching, and we have transitioned into business coaching and people coaching.
Sure.
Grit is the one thing that connects them. So talk to us a little bit about grit in your past life versus where grit is today.
Well, I'm going to be a pretty contrary guest at this point. Then we're just going to start with controversy.
All right.
You know, the sport that I come from that you're referring to is I come from endurance cycling. I come from competitive endurance cycling, and I sort of think about things in terms of gears. My bike has a lot of gears. I want to use them. And grit in the gears for me is actually the opposite of what I want, right? I want gears that are flowing, that are mechanical, that are precise, and grit is what gets in the way of that. And I think that grit, as you're talking about it in this kind of emotional, physical, spiritual sense, is what we're talking about is resilience and perseverance and stick-to-itedness and figure-it-outness and all of those other things. And I think, you know, grit is, for me, in some ways, this idea that we sort of carry around, for me at least, and people that I've worked with, you know, thought that grit and grind had to be the thing in their 30s, and it was the striving and the grasping and this kind of energy of like, it's almost like you're wrestling onto this idea and trying to conquer it. And for me, grit is this friction, right? And that friction kind of gets in the way of what we want, which is the capacity to really enjoy what we're doing while we're doing it. And this isn't, you know, I don't believe in this idea of love what you do and it's going to be free flowing and it's going to be easy peasy. That's not at all true. I mean, I think there's a reality that having a business equals toil. There's toil, right? It's part of the game, and training is hard, and doing the work is hard. But for me, the grit was doing these things in the past, but not really liking it, right? To me, grit sort of makes me feel like, oh, am I getting a blister on my foot? So I have a slightly different take on the grit thing. And the other thing for me, grit tends to feel a little domineering and hyper masculine to me in some ways. And so, you know, I look for things of how, from a cycling perspective, that's translated into how I coach businesses and leaders. What I'm actually looking for is the most sustainable power for the least possible input, right? So I want higher power, lower input, lower input, so that what we're not talking about is short bursts of huge power, but this kind of extended sustainability.
Yeah. So, you know, grit, and I'm going to bounce between grit and grind. And I know that, well, I tell you what, let's talk about that. The difference between grit and grind. Let's kind of unpack that a little bit. As far as we talked a little bit about grit, and let's talk about grind.
Okay.
What does grind look like? to
So
someone that you can tell that's grinding too much in what they do?
great. Thanks for asking it that way. We tend to we culturally, we in any capitalist business, right, tend to really celebrate the idea of the grind, rise and grind, get up and get after it, get up and do it, and hustle and go for it, and all those things, right? Grind to me looks like so many different ways grind can show up. Certainly in the people that I work with, grinding looks a lot like plodding. It's like you're just going along, you're moving along, and you're not necessarily going back to it, you're not getting much power for effort, right? You're sort of putting in more power and getting out, and you're putting in more effort and getting out lower power. It's like walking up this long hill, right? And it's just that same plodding thing. And so for me, grind, or the people that I work with, grind can often look like, great quote. I worked with someone who said, I want to fire myself from my own business. That's what grind looks like to me, right? Grind looks like to me, say, if I'm working with someone who actually works or has worked in a big corporation, grind looks like I have to be hard on myself, right? It's using that language where we're kind of unintentionally or intentionally somehow adding more weight to our effort than actually needs to be there, right? And sometimes most of the time, that's the stories that we tell ourselves and the narratives that we supply and the way we position things and have a perspective on it. So grind can look like micromanagement, right? It can look like controlling. It can look like manipulation.
Yeah, so as you know, I coach CrossFit. And in a workout, let's just take a 20-minute workout. Those are typically what we would call a grind. It could be a long bike ride. I don't know how many miles that is. When you are in that process of the grind, it's coming. Let's say you're halfway through the ride or the workout, and you have that mindset like, oh my God, we're only halfway through this, right? I'm only halfway through a day.
Mm-hmm.
The shift in order to finish without, you want to give up. You're like, I'm done with this. How from a physical standpoint, there's one part of it, but your mind wants your body to shut down. Your mind is wanting your muscles to stop doing what they're doing. So What is that shift that people mentally need to make in order to get to push through that?
I think it's a trainable muscle. And I like that you bring in the CrossFit example. A past business that I had, I owned a spin studios in Los Angeles. So I've coached probably 5,000 hours of indoor cycling classes. And not the kind where it's like, hey, let's dance on the bike. But for me, my approach was always pretty rigorous. Anything that I used for myself as an athlete training for a race where I was competing, not just with myself, but actually competing for the race. Those kinds of training I would bring into spin classes as well. And, that's interval work. You're talking about interval work, right? There's an on period, there's an off period. There's a work period, there's a rest period. That's the nature of interval work. There's on, there's off, and off is equally as important as on, if not more. That's where the growth happens. Challenge happens in on. That's where you challenge your mental fitness. That's where we challenge our physical fitness. That's where we challenge our cardiovascular fitness. Off is where adaptation happens. In the case of your example on the bike, so actually, let's go back to this thing that you said, where your mind wants to give up before your body does, and you just brought me back to all of these spin classes that I used to coach, and one of my things that I would say to people doing those classes who were general fitness enthusiasts was that your mind is always going to want to give up before your body does. Your mind will always do that. So you have to have a different conversation in your mind, right? And that's we have to change that conversation when we're in that dark place.
Yeah, hearing you say that reminded me of the difference between external cues and internal cues to get, as a coach, to get someone to do something, right? You've got
Sure.
these external cues, you got the internal cues. And the internal cues, to me, is where I find, as a coach, I find that magic. Whether I'm coaching CrossFit, whether I'm coaching trap shooting, or whether I'm coaching a business client, is getting through what that internal cue is, something, that self-talk that needs to happen in order to get them to perform the task, whatever that is. When you identify that with your clients, that there's some self-talk or something that needs, how do you help them find that?
How do I help them find the limiting talk, or how do I help them find their way through the limiting talk?
So it may be limiting talk, but there may be some cues that they need to tell themselves to help them push through the grind that's going on, that self-talk, the to get in the zone, so to speak. What is it that they need? How do you identify that?
I identify it by a lot of their physical language. So a lot of the important work for me happens in these sessions, in one-on-one or one-on-group sessions. And I'm just very fortunate in that, I spent such a long time on the physical side of coaching, whether one-on-one or on the bike or doing group fitness classes similar to CrossFit, maybe. But so being able to see body language, to see how people were standing, to see how they were walking, right? To see how they were carrying themselves. So for me, I'm a listener of the body, right? I'm a listener of what's going on in their body language, right? Where is their attention? Where are they holding their shoulders, right? Do they look like they're white-knuckling their way through life?
Right.
I'm a recovering alcoholic, so I know a little something about white-knuckling and can see what white-knuckling looks like. So I think when I start to spot it, it's very easy for me to then say, what is going on? What are you thinking now? What is your opposition? What's your resistance? A lot of time, it depends on who they are. Men will typically go, I don't have any resistance. I don't have any, or some who may be a little bit more in tune will go, how did you see that? Right. And women will tend to be a bit more open to, like, oh, here's the resistance, right? Here's the thing that I'm blocking. And so it's not just training someone through the resistance. The training is getting them to recognize the resistance in themselves. And it's individualized, right? We can sort of throw things out, but like a very simple one would be, when I catch someone starting to, say, be very critical of themselves or their situation or someone else or something else, and seeing them being very judgment, I then can sort of say, ask it a question like, why am I being resistant? What is the resistance for? What is my goal, and how is this resistance serving me or not serving me? And so we have to almost learn to interrogate that resistance and ask questions of it. And I don't mean interrogate in like a cruel way. I just mean we have to be able to scrutinize it and ask different questions of it, because it's really easy for us, you, me, everyone else, people in the studio, to just assume that we know what's going on, except we're all really not that great at being that aware of ourselves, no matter how well trained we are. So I think it's just to open up that awareness muscle, open up that curiosity muscle, open up that courage and honesty muscle, and be willing to ask questions of this thing that we're experiencing within ourselves. But the extrinsic side that you're talking about, I kind of think one of my jobs as a coach is to, and I'm a very poor cheerleader, but it is to kind of be that person's advocate and cheerleader until at some point they have to take the responsibility over for themselves.
Yeah, you touched on self-awareness. Self-awareness is, to me, from a leadership standpoint, one of the critical pieces in order to be able to effectively lead a group of people. In self-awareness is not a God-given gift. It's something you have to earn and work on. And people, a lot of times that I run into, they don't even know what that means.
Right.
So talk through what self-awareness would look like when you're working with someone. How can they develop better self-awareness? Is there things that you identify in people to help them become more self-aware?
For sure. Great example of this. I've been working with someone on some leadership coaching who had been working in big companies for a while and now has moved to a small company and had really kind of become locked down in his communication and locked down in his interpersonal skills. And we had we talked through some things the other day. And part of it was that he had these experiences at bigger companies where those companies really wanted him to stay in a box, and the people he worked for wanted him to stay in a box. And then he said, I just realized I can't believe how much of myself that I was repressing, right? And carrying that, then that repression gets trained, that self-repression gets trained and carried forward. And, as we start to move out of that, as he starts to move out of that, you see a different person. You see someone who's really funny, right? Someone who they come to me and they're like not funny. And all of a sudden, 5-6 weeks later, they're hilarious. You're like, where's that guy been? But I think on the self-awareness side, people make a big mistake, a big confusion. We're often confused between the difference between being self-conscious and self-aware. And self-consciousness to me is self-centeredness. It's always like it's thinking about me. It's thinking about my needs, where I'm at, like what kind of likes I'm getting on my LinkedIn post, what kind of cheering on that's getting. And so it's always about satisfying my ego needs. And I think we go through a journey, part of growing up and becoming mature. Like we confuse responsibility for maturity, but part of maturing is kind of understanding self-awareness. That self-awareness is how we're connected to the greater team, people around us, the larger impact that we have in the world and how we are impacted in the world, and how we are impacted by others, and understanding that connection. So I think your question was also, how do I start to pick that out in people? I think a very easy way to do that is write down a list of your resentments of all through your whole life, and the things that have impacted you and the people who've impacted you, and how, you still might carry some anger and frustration about that. And then understand, what is it picked at you, right? What button did it push? And then you can say, hey, what was my part in that, right? Then it becomes, self-awareness is also this process of becoming less of a things have happened to me and I've had a part in it. So, I think that's kind of one way to start approaching it, is to say, when is my ego coming up? Why is my ego coming up? If my ego is coming up, what am I trying to protect? And if I'm trying to protect it, why am I trying to protect it? And if you want to be really brave, where the heck did that come from to begin with? Where did that start?
Yeah, one of the, I'm going to say this because my wife might actually watch and listen to this, but one of the beauties of being married to a psychiatrist is I understand that my words and action impact others in certain ways. And that social awareness and self-awareness both is what's triggering me and what am I doing and saying that may be impacting others, and just recognizing how that happens. And that's for somebody that's never understood that, they've never been taught what this actually means. What does social awareness mean? What does self-awareness, the whole emotional intelligence part
Sure.
is, it's a whole world in itself. And for somebody that's never heard it, how do you introducing that to them is an art, right?
Yeah, I suppose it is. And I think as such, it's individualized, right? How you bring it up is individualized. I don't know that maybe there are frameworks for this. I am not, I am not a psychiatrist. Any of my psychological training really comes from just close human observation. I mean, I guess a part of it came from, I spent 3 years working with Holocaust survivors and listening to their stories and starting to listen to what goes unsaid. I guess there is actually there is a way you could do this, right? There's sort of multiple levels of listening. There is listening for my needs. There's listening for facts. There's listening for emotions. Then there's generative listening, right? And
Yeah.
most of us in that self-centered phase is, am I listening to understand, or am I listening to win, persuade, convince, whatever? In other words, if I'm trying to do that, that's all about me. And that's a cul-de-sac, right? There is only one way in and one way out of that. And so I think training people to listen and shift how they listen and shift how they hear things and shift how they sit in conversations is actually one really great uncomfortable way to do that.
Yeah. I run into a lot of people that are highly intentional, highly resourceful. So the opposite of those of intentional and resourceful, the opposite is altruistic and selfless. There's strengths in being intentional, strengths in being resourceful, but recognizing that there's strengths on the other end of this motivational spectrum, helping them have vision about that.
Can you walk me through that dichotomy, so that I understand? You've got intentional, resourceful, altruistic, and what?
So it's intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Is on one end
Mm-hmm.
of the spectrum, and altruistic is on the other.
Okay.
So altruistic is about you, intentional is about me, so to speak. I'm paraphrasing here. And then there is, on the utilization motivation, there is resourceful on one end. Like, I want you as a friend because I like the barbecue that you cook, right? That's the resourceful thinking. And then there is the selfless. I didn't invite you over because I thought you'd bring your barbecue. I brought you over because I like you as a person. So that's more selfless. So those are two different motivators there. In helping one side see the other side is an art to that. And what you just described, that you touched around that, seeing the other side, or meaning the people that are not like me, that are motivated differently than me, and having empathy for that. I know I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's what I was hearing in your story.
I suppose. I mean, I think that what you're getting at in those matrices that you're talking about is something. I think anyone who goes through like a 12-step recovery will have to address this at some point. What are your motives and intentions, right? Mm-hmm. I think even more simply, what were your motives and intentions? Were your motives and intentions to get this thing that you needed? Like, you could be the most philanthropic person in the world, or love the charity that you're part of, but if what you're really doing is, I'm doing that charity because I need to add to my network and maybe I'll get some gigs out of it. It's like,
yes,
getting to that answer, that's the answer, right? That's where you go, see, this is where you made it all about yourself. Like, yeah, sure, that looks great, but my intentions were good. Like, no, your intentions were about you, right? So I think, I will, in an empathetic way, get up in people's faces about that, because I think a lot of people, we need to shock ourselves out of that and start to say, I don't want to get caught up in the altruistic and intentional and those paradoxes, but I would think that when we can start to again scrutinize what our real motives and intentions are, we can kind of change the game, right? You can sort of change how you play. Did you watch Ted Lasso?
Yes.
My favorite, like my favorite character arc, and the moment that it happens is miraculous. And of course, I'm using, I'm using fiction to make a point, but that's what it's there for. Is you've got the Jamie Tart character who is just a jerk at the start. All he cares about is his personal brand, his personal success, his personal glory. And he goes through his arc. And in season 3, the team starts playing a whole new kind of, and he always wants to be the one who scores. He always wants to be the one who, he's got to be, quote, the guy, right? We all know that person. Right. We've all been that person. And they get to this point in season 3, like maybe episode 7 or whatever. They've been trying this whole new approach to how they play, and it's not quite working. They're getting creamed in their 5th straight match. And all of a sudden you see his light bulb go off and he goes, hold on, here's what you need to do. Pass the ball to me. Wait, no, not that. Pass the ball through me. I'm just going to move the ball around. I'm not going to try and score the goal. I'm going to move the ball. Just keep passing it through me, right? And he makes this shift in his play from where it's been all about to and from him, and he shifts to through him, and that through makes him way more connected to the team, right? It makes him more connected to everyone else. And so it's that complete transition of the I and the me to the us and the we and the through. And just that preposition shift, going from and to the preposition of through and with, completely different mental shift, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I got a story around that. When I played high school football, we had, if you ask who's the asshole, everybody pointed to this one guy that always was the problem, and he made it about him. And there's 2 things that can happen. I can tell you that what happened to him wasn't so good. We took care of him after practice, kind of thing, and physically, right? So that's one way to address it. The other way to address it is you help them understand how to play a part of the team, or you run them off the team. Right. So in businesses, right, when you have that guy on the team, what I run into a lot of times is we need this person to either acclimate as a family concept or the team concept, or we need to find a way for them to find another job somewhere else. When you're working with people on that transition, so you can't always take them behind the barn, right? So that transition of helping them see the light is a challenge. That's not an easy task. That's a tall order.
Takes time.
Yeah. So when you work with leaders and they have that apple on the team that's not so good for the barrel, what is that in your world, whether it's been in cycling or in businesses, what does that look like? How do we
can talk about this in a business sense. I think it's a lot of times you'll have small business teams that come together and they've hired who's available. Mm-hmm. Right? They've hired okay, I've just had to because I've needed a warm body. Mm-hmm. And it's totally okay to outgrow people. We should outgrow each other. right? People should outgrow my coaching. They should say, I've had you for 6 months later, right? And I think in the case of businesses, then it's on the leader in this case. The leader has some growing up to do. First of all, they got to figure out how much of this is about me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have a part in it. And when they can start fixing their part in it, then they can come to some much clearer decisions about what they want to do, what needs to be done with this other person. I often think you have to get that person to make the decision to leave. But the leader needs to have the courage to start pushing that agenda and to start having that conversation. I don't think there's anything wrong with letting people go. I think that's people get traded off teams all the time. That's how this, you move people around, and we need that change for growth. I think it's the leader's job to make that mental step and that next move to say, this isn't working anymore. You have to be brave enough to say, this isn't working anymore. I think this is one of the detriments of when small businesses or medium businesses say we're a family. It's just an absolute lie. And it sets up the wrong cultural message, right? We're a team, and people will get traded. And I think of businesses as, friends for a reason, friends for a season, friends for a lifetime. Businesses we are friends for a reason and a season, but we're not necessarily friends. We have to send people off, and they have to go find their growth somewhere else. But I think every part of that is getting everyone to see the nature of the situation, right? We know when things aren't working, and if someone who needs to leave isn't leaving, then that question has to come up. It has to, maybe not in those exact words, but it has to be, it has to be like moved forward. It has to be in their interest to actually move forward and find something else. Because we'll all stay stuck. If given our druthers, we'll all stay stuck. We'll choose the paycheck.
Yeah, you mentioned, you used the word see, visually see, and to me that's about clarity. And helping business owners with clarity, that's a whole nother thing. And in the world I live in, which is all founded around trust, clarity and consistency are probably the two mothers of building trust, making sure that there's a clear vision or clear goals or clear expectations or that clarity.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working with business owners, and I know there's an umbrella of clarity, and we can kind of rabbit hole this different ways, but what is it that you see that's fairly common around clarity that when they don't have it, to help them get it?
They don't know what they stand for. I think so many small businesses don't know what they stand for. And if you don't know what you stand for, you can't quite know what you're pointed towards. And I think
so. Now you're talking about purpose, right?
I think purpose or North Star.
Yeah.
Like, where is it you're pointed towards? Just your North Star. What are you oriented towards? I had that same spin business I had a business partner, and we didn't have the same North Star. We didn't have, and when you don't have the same North Star, you're talking different languages within your partners, your teams, your communication is off. You start talking about the wrong things, or you start getting focused on shiny things that are distracting, right? It's, you basically diet hop, right? It's the business equivalent of diet hopping, right? It's like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. So everything becomes a tactical fire drill in that case. Or you just end up listless with not a lot of momentum, and because you're in this kind of inertia state of you're just going at whatever speed, right? Because you're making the same decisions, and that inertia state means that you're not really driving the ship. You're just kind of going along with where the wind and tide takes you.
Yeah, kind of resurfacing grind, right? So with that lack of clarity and with not having an aligned vision enhances that grind that you feel, right?
Oh, that is an energy suck. Oh, you're absolutely right. It's like that is an absolute energy suck, because what you lose sense of is hope and direction and light and clarity. And it's just like, it's basically the story of Sisyphus. Rock up the mountain, back down the mountain, rock up the mountain, back down the mountain. And I think a lot of people just end up in that state where it's like, oh, got to get up and push the rock back up the mountain. Got to do it again. Got to that's my lot.
Yeah, it's like the old Dunkin' Donuts commercial, right? You got to make the donuts.
Got to make the donuts. Right. And I think that to answer a question from a follow-along question from that, how do you help people get clarity, or where clarity plays a part with business owners? It is remarkable to me the number of business owners who lose complete sight of the impact that they have in the world.
Ooh, well said.
And they don't actually know. They've completely lost sight of it, right? It's like, oh, yeah, well, we help hotels and wineries sell their stuff. It's like, that's not what you do. Like, what you do is help people who run wineries and hotels change the equation and live the lives that they want, because you're helping drive revenue, that you make impact on lives. And so, like, the whole language of business, like, you walk around LinkedIn and it's like, I've always hated MBA corporate language. And I spent 10 years at Disney, right? So I know corporate speak. I hate it. It's so dispassionate. It's so contrived. It so misses the point. And just answer the question, what is the impact that you have on someone's life? What is and when we can start to answer that, you can change your inspiration. You can start to go, oh, wait a minute, here's where it's tangible, and here's where we can do better. And you start to have a far different relationship to what you do.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. And until they understand and appreciate how powerful that is, they just stay in that grind.
They just stay.
It's the hamster wheel.
And that's why they end up wanting to fire themselves from their own business.
Yeah. There's according to you brought up LinkedIn, there is this person that shows up in my feed on a fairly regular basis. And I don't know how the algorithms work. And he's very accomplished in what he does. It's what it is, man. That's the only thing I'll say. And I'm not going to say his profession, but the only time he shows up is to promote either a part of the business that he impacts or some award that he shows up for. And it's all about that. It's done in a very corporate way. It's in a very spotlight way. And I'm like, how does this guy keep showing up in my feed, right? So I don't even want to see it. Nobody wants to be around that.
Right.
And I don't really know who he is. We are connected. I don't know how, but so my point is that is very polarizing in that corporate speak that you talk about.
Oh, except, everyone throws it around, right? Everyone, even all of these people who market themselves as founders and solopreneurs and all of that, we all buy in. There's this sort of buy-in to the language that somehow using the lingo makes us sound more tuned in. And for me, I completely tune out to it. It's like, let's get a bit more human. That to me is performative, right? Mm-hmm. And let's just talk about this in real human terms. What's happening? What's the impact, right? How am I showing up? How are my processes? How am I improving my process? All those things, right? And I think let's not get in our own way with this, with kind of a contrived language.
Yeah, the difference that makes on others in the organization is also impactful, not only on the receivers of the products or services, but from a team chemistry standpoint, right?
Great observation. That's I can think of several times I've seen that where you have leaders or managers who come in and they're throwing around the lingo, and everyone that works for them is just like, I'm rolling my eyes now. And
yeah, it's hard to get away from it. If you're that person on the team,
right.
you're trapped, right? It's like a small bit, even if it's corporate America, you're like a small business person. You're trapped until you figure out a way to get out. That means either transfer to another team, hopefully, or you have to leave the company. I mean, it's some serious ramifications around that.
Sure. Yeah, sure. But I think, like I said, teams change all the time, and businesses change all the time. And I think part of that is like, what is it you're looking for? Like, what is the stability? What is the trade-off you're accepting for stability, right? And what is this? What are you willing to put up with for the security and stability? And if that's, if you're opting into it, then and opting into it willingly, then great. But let's accept that and move on. If that's not what we want, then we either work to change the team and change the culture, or we find a way to move forward and on to something else. Now, I think that that's a really easy thing to say, given that I haven't been in a corporate space in a really long time. And that those mindsets of being in there generally are all about conditioning to stay in the place and be part of the team. And they're all about this false sense of safety. I had a conversation with someone who works for a big company, really big company. There's an upper mid-level leader in the company, and I just remember saying, "Listen, if you're worried about longevity in this company, I guarantee you, this company isn't worried about your longevity in it, right?" And I'm not saying this to be venal or to be conspiring, but I'm just saying that they don't have the same sense of longevity that you've got. So risk is always going to be inherent, right?
Yeah. I know we need to wrap up here, but there's one other topic I wanted to bring up.
Okay.
And that is the saying that you hear, people don't leave jobs, they leave bad bosses or something like that, right?
Yep.
What does that look like in your world when you're working with clients?
I think they leave corrupted systems. I think they leave contaminated systems, and we're all playing a part in those systems. Yeah, there are definitely bad leaders out there. I guess my question is, when you say, what does that look like in my world? Am I working with people who are bad leaders, or are you asking, I don't know, can you help me understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be vague.
That's okay.
So the question would be, like, when you're working with a client on this, is that something that gets discussed? Is that a phrase that ever gets mentioned? I know in my world it does all the time, and I just didn't know about it. I work in the exit space, right?
Yeah.
On how to prepare business for sale.
Yeah.
So that's a topic that comes up in owner dependency. So in what you do, do you ever discuss that around how to, being a better boss means?
Oh, I discuss leadership
retention
all the time. I mean, I think largely what I do, we can call this mental performance coaching, but it's also leadership coaching, and it's probably just as much, if not more, leadership coaching, right? And I think that the two are pretty inextricable. because, and you were going back to that a conversation that we kind of kicked this off with after Grind and Grit, when we started talking about self-consciousness versus self-awareness, right?
Mhm.
I think I often look at, and we'll often look at how someone is presenting themselves, and are they showing up and just being, or are they in the process of projection and presenting? If they're if they're in projection and presenting, then they're not really kind of showing up as a leader. They're more concerned with what their image is, and there's that. Well, how do I get seen as a boss? Well, don't. Well, don't. That's the first answer. Your job is to, and helping them kind of understand what their role is in how they motivate and inspire others to come along, and how they build those teams, and how they empower people, in the exit space that you're in. Like, you're never going to exit your business if you haven't actually empowered those who work for you to actually run the business, right? You will
Right.
always be a cult of personality. It will always be built around the cult of your ego. And, I get a couple of different kinds of people. I get people who have been running businesses and who are just fatigued from the grind, right? That's it. They are fatigued. They're operating with some level of functional burnout.
Mhm.
And the other kind of people that I will get are often people who are very accomplished or look accomplished on paper, and yet they're at this point where they're suffering from self-confidence issues
Mhm.
in both cases. And I get people who, and part of the reason people have been suffering in the grind is because they've been doing leadership mechanics that aren't really working for them. It's not working for their teams. And so everything feels slower. In both cases, we can shift them by getting people to work on their self-awareness, work on their motives and intentions, and have a better understanding of those, and understand how it is, what it is they are contributing to the dynamics around them, and how they impact that, and how they can change it. So in both cases, it's the same thing. It may be applied slightly differently between grinding leadership and self-confidence issues.
Yeah, it's a big mountain. It's a big thing to climb to get through all of that. Yeah.
Sure.
Well,
I mean,
I
it's
appreciate
all that climbing is what got them there in the first place.
right. Yeah, somebody gave this is a bicycle. I just thought of this. A bicycle example that I heard a few years back is it's not about the rider, it's about the bicycle. Right? You put Lance Armstrong on a tricycle, chances are he's not going to win the Tour de France, right? So it's not about the rider sometimes, it's more about do you have the right rider on the right bicycle, and helping them see that. That was an analogy that was given to me 3 years ago that I was like, never really thought about it being more about the bicycle.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that analogy, because you can take I yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that analogy. And the reason I don't agree with that analogy is that there's a difference between being strong and being good. And
Mm.
when it comes to cycling as well, right? You can be very strong on the bike, but you may have no pack presence. You may not know how to ride in a group of 200 people around you at 28 miles an hour and keep your business tight and keep it together. You may be, sorry, triathletes, I'm going to pick on you right now, but triathletes are notoriously poor bike handlers. And so they go from triathlon, where they're used to just like, go, 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 go. I'm just going to go, go. They're very strong. But then when you start to have to add team dynamics into things on the bike, competitive cycling is a team sport. It takes multiple riders, each having different jobs to accomplish things in different settings, different environments. So, I think there's a difference between being good and being strong. And being good means having a whole other layer of emotional intelligence, of awareness, of situational awareness, of perspective, of energy management, of how to go the fastest and the longest while doing the least amount of work.
Right. Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I could keep going, but we are running out of time. So for those that are interested in talking to you more, how do they find you?
Absolutely. You can find me on my website. It's Locomotive Coaching. There's no E. I'm sure there will be a link to it somewhere. There's no E in locomotive. It goes way back to when I was coaching cycling, and I'm just too lazy to actually change it. So you could find me at locomotivecoaching.com. If you don't want to actually talk to me, you can check out my monthly newsletter. I send out an article once a month on the idea of shifting our perspective, shifting focus, shifting our energy, shifting our actions, shifting our story. So it's called Shift Happens. That's the name of the newsletter. So you got the theme there. And then you can also just find me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of writing on LinkedIn and love to have direct message conversations.
All right. Well, great.
Thanks for having me on.
It's been fantastic. Oh, yeah. Would love to have this conversation again sometime in the future. So look for that.
Anytime. I'm happy to do it.
All right. Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you.